Hi everyone, welcome to another one of my videos. Today I'm going to explain all of the issues with this game's plot so that you can all see why people don't like this game's story. Let's start with Sonic's story. Number 1. Sonic himself doesn't matter all that much in this game. We know this because he never directly interacts with Solaris, the villain of the game. Not once does he interact with Memphiles, and his encounter with Iblis was completely random and had no impact whatsoever on the plot. And Sonic is supposed to be the main character. His face is even on the game's cover. Sonic's really only here to be a catalyst for Elise's emotional breakdown. In other words, he's just here to cause Elise to cry. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't his only role. Think about it. Sonic doesn't actually have any intrinsic importance in the plot. He's important only through Elise and not through his own worth as the post-main character. In fact, Elise is arguably more important than some of the characters in this plot, including Sonic. After all, she and her family are the reason behind many of the events in this game. Thus, Elise doesn't need Sonic to have importance, but Sonic needs Elise to have importance. There's no mutual worth here. Sonic is important only by proxy. Not even by proxy, actually. Sonic is important only by coincidence. When you think about it, Memphiles didn't actually need Sonic to make Elise cry. He killed Sonic simply because it was the best way to make Elise suffer. This makes sense. The Duke of Soleanna experimented on Solaris once, and Memphiles didn't like that, so he decided to take his revenge on the Duke's daughter. Granted, the Duke technically already died, but Memphiles wanted to make the whole family suffer, and what better way to do that than to take away the thing that Elise cherished most? So it's not that Sonic was the only means of making Elise cry, he just happened to be the best means. After all, Memphiles could have made Elise cry through other means. For example, he could have tortured her or her citizens. On the other hand, Shadow and Silver don't have this problem of being irrelevant. They are both the heroes who fight against the main villains of the game. They are even directly involved with the Solaris incident, an event that causes many of the other events in the game. That alone gives them as much worth as the main villains because the plot largely depends on them. Sonic doesn't have any of that. Shadow and Silver have inherent worth in the plot. Sonic does not. This fact is even more laughable when you watch the last story. In one of the cutscenes, Shadow himself said to Silver that it was not possible to defeat Solaris without Sonic's help. I don't like this scene, because it makes Sonic look much more important than he actually is. Everyone needed Sonic only for his ability to turn super, and not because he had anything to do with the actual plot. Had it not been for that, no one would have had a need for Sonic because the plot surely didn't have a need for him up to this point either. To make matters worse, because Sonic does not have a lot of worth, his friends Tails and Knuckles don't have a lot of worth either. They hardly do anything in the plot. Tails does do a few useful things for Sonic and Elise early in the plot, but after a certain point, he just fades away into complete irrelevance, almost never to be seen again. Knuckles is even less important, as his only noteworthy contribution to the plot is giving Sonic a message from Dr. Eggman. It's sad. Actually, you do see Tails again, along with Knuckles. You see Tails in Wave Ocean trying to chase after the egg carrier again, and you see both Tails and Knuckles in Aquatic Base. However, Tails and Knuckles are seen only in gameplay and not in any actual cutscenes at these points, so having them in these levels hardly makes an impact. That, and no attempt is made to explain what Tails and Knuckles were even doing without Sonic up to these points in time. I just don't understand it. Tails and Knuckles go through the trouble of joining Sonic in his rescue of the princess from Dr. Eggman by infiltrating Dr. Eggman's base together, but when it's time to save her again in Radical Train, they just disappear entirely. Did the writers forget about them or something? Were they really that irrelevant? And the number of irrelevant characters in Sonic's story doesn't stop there. Dr. Eggman himself doesn't matter either. He's here only to be a villain for Sonic. Despite his grand plan of one day controlling the flames of disaster, he has no bearing on the plot himself. At least Sonic is needed to make Elise release Iblis. What is Dr. Eggman needed for? He's not even the main villain of the game. All in all, you have what I call a chain of irrelevancy going on here. Tails, Knuckles, and Dr. Eggman matter only because Sonic matters, and Sonic matters only because Elise matters. Elise doesn't need other characters that much to be important, but other characters greatly need her to be important. Now let's talk about problem number 2 in Sonic's story, the number of times that Elise got kidnapped. Did the princess really need to get kidnapped 4 fucking times in the plot? Oh, sorry, 5 times if you count Silver's story. Were the writers seriously unable to come up with better ways to keep the plot moving that didn't involve having the princess captured repeatedly? If you have to make the plot progress in incredibly and repeatedly contrived ways, then you have a bad plot and need to start over. I was willing to forgive the first two times that Elise got kidnapped. Every other time after that was just damn annoying, even on my very first playthrough of the game. And to make matters worse, one of those kidnappings happened because Sonic actually left Elise alone in the castle unattended. Why on earth would he ever do that? There's a reason why the President of the United States is constantly surrounded by bodyguards. You don't leave someone of great importance alone like that. Elise had zero protection against Dr. Eggman. And don't tell me that she would have been protected inside the castle. She wouldn't have. The Soliana guards would have been too useless to do anything, something that one of the NPCs admits, by the way. So, what exactly was Sonic doing while Dr. Eggman was threatening the city to force Elise to go to his ship? No explanation is given for his disappearance. The third problem with Sonic's story is Elise's personality. She doesn't have one. No, I'm afraid that being kind, passive, and reserved does not count as having a personality. Not completely, anyway. Elise is a boring and generic princess. She doesn't have any traits or quirks that make me invested in her character. It sucks that her parents died, but that is not enough to make me interested in her. You can give a character the most tragic backstory in the world, but it won't mean a thing if the character is about as entertaining as cardboard. I have no reason to care about Elise. I would care more about Elise if the writers had fleshed out her backstory more. What are her dreams, wishes, and interests? Does she like to play chess? Is she into machines? Is she a fashion whiz? Hell, maybe she can tell us more about what it's like to be a princess and how she feels about it. I don't know, just give me anything other than I'm orphaned, passive, and sheltered. You can't expect me to care about Elise if you are not filling in the blanks, Sonic Team. To make matters worse, I didn't even get all that emotional when Elise died in Kingdom Valley. Don't get me wrong, it was a sad death, but considering that time travel exists in this universe, Elise's death wasn't even going to last anyway. Combine that fact with Elise's lack of a personality and her tendency to get kidnapped several times within the same damn plot, and you get an uninteresting damsel in distress with a meaningless death. Do you know what the funny thing is? As the Grey Clement pointed out in his review of Sonic 2006, there's a very similar plot with Chris's friend Helen in the anime Sonic X. Helen's parents worked a lot, so they couldn't pay much attention to her. One day, her wheelchair got stuck in the mud, and Sonic, being the awesome guy he is, decided to help her out. Then the two agreed to have a date together, and their adventure played out in a similar way to Elise's. The only difference is that Helen's adventure with Sonic was written better than Elise's adventure with Sonic. That, and if Helen had ever actually gotten hurt or even killed during that adventure, there would have been actual consequences for it. The fourth problem with Sonic's story is the useless levels. There are two of these in the story, the first Wave Ocean stage and the White Acropolis stage. The first Wave Ocean stage is pointless because that entire segment could be taken out without affecting the plot. Sonic and Tails chase after the egg carrier along the beach but are unable to catch up to it. Then Tails, says that the princess was moved to another location, and he and Sonic decide to head back to the city. This makes the entire trip through Wave Ocean utterly pointless. The story could have started right at the Dusty Desert stage, and it wouldn't have been affected at all. Am I wrong? The White Acropolis stage is useless because Dr. Eggman does something so incredibly stupid and unnecessary. Earlier, Team Sonic receives a message from Dr. Eggman, telling them that he would be willing to trade the princess for the Blue Chaos Emerald they have. Dr. Eggman also tells them where to meet him, his base in White Acropolis. Team Sonic heads over there, infiltrates the base, and wrecks half of Dr. Eggman's stuff in the process. Then, when they finally arrive at the meeting spot, Dr. Eggman taunts them for being late, which is odd because he never told them what time to show up, but whatever. And Knuckles points out to him that they had to deal with all of his robots. What Knuckles says here brings me to the issue at hand. Why didn't Dr. Eggman simply let them inside his base? Like, why didn't he just allow them to enter the area under strict surveillance? What was the point of letting them run rampant throughout his base? Had he simply just let Team Sonic enter his base, there wouldn't have been a need for the White Acropolis level. The fifth problem that Sonic's story has is how disconnected it is from all the other stories. Actually, this ties into problem number 1 with Sonic's story, but this particular point needs to be emphasized separately. At the very beginning of the game, Elise has a very brief flashback of seeing Silver during the Solaris incident 10 years ago. This shouldn't have happened since she was rendered unconscious from the explosion, but whatever. A lot of things in this story don't make any sense. Anyway, because of this flashback, Elise initially mistakes Sonic for Silver, but soon realizes that they're not the same person. What I find interesting here is that Silver attempts to kill Sonic twice, and Elise never tells Sonic about her encounter with Silver many years ago. Why didn't she mention it despite Silver appearing in front of her twice? Hell, why didn't she tell Silver himself? That would have made things more interesting. Moreover, in Silver's future, Team Sonic overhear a conversation that Memphiles, Silver, and Blaze have about the Iblis trigger. When those three leave the area, Team Sonic enter the room, and Knuckles comments on how Memphiles looks very similar to Shadow. Then Tails notices the nearby computer and informs the others that Elise is going to die in 2 days. Later, the trio meet up with Rouge and Shadow. Now, here's the interesting part. Why don't any of them mention Memphiles' existence to Shadow? There's a dude out there that looks exactly like him, and not a single one of them is going to talk about it? Seriously? That could have led to an interesting conversation between Team Sonic and Shadow, and would have given Sonic more of a reason to be involved in the main plot. But no, such a chance was wasted. Seriously, does no one in Sonic's story care about anything other than Dr. Eggman's plan to kidnap and exploit Elise? Elise doesn't tell Sonic about Silver, and Team Sonic don't tell Shadow about Memphiles. If your own characters don't care about or pay any attention to certain events surrounding their plot, then why the hell should the audience care? For the record, Sonic's story would have worked relatively well had it been established as a standalone story. But it wasn't. And, to show that I'm not merely talking out of my butt, I put a link in the description to a thread that echoes some of the same issues I had with Sonic's plot. In short, Sonic's story could have been written so much better. Okay, so I wrote a lot about Sonic's story. In fact, I wrote about 4 pages worth of issues with Sonic's story. Yeah, it's that bad. Whoever wrote Sonic's story is not a very good writer. That being said, let's move on from that plot. Now I'm going to talk about Silver's story. Silver's story is considerably better than Sonic's story, but the former still suffers from crippling writing issues. First, we have Memphiles' involvement with Silver. My question is this: why? What reason does Memphiles have to trick Silver into killing Sonic? Silver is not a threat because Iblis won't stay down, and Memphiles could very easily kill Sonic himself, which, surprise surprise, he does in the last story. So why did he waste all that time trying to trick Silver? Now, this would make sense if Silver had something of interest to Memphiles, but he doesn't. There's nothing that Silver has that Memphiles would need. He's just some kid looking for answers on how to defeat Iblis, and he isn't the only one in his timeline doing that. There is no reason for Memphiles to bother with him. And I hope that some of you who are listening to this video aren't going to suggest that Memphiles tricked Silver and Blaze into killing Sonic just because he wanted some sadistic pleasure. If you are going to suggest that, then that is one of the weakest excuses of a plot that I have ever heard of. If your villain has little to no motivation to do evil things, and they're doing evil things simply because they're evil, then you have a weak villain. Our second issue with Silver's plot is Amy. I'm sorry, I just have to wonder why some of these characters are even here. They really don't serve any major purpose in the plot except in very specific circumstances. Essentially, about half of the cast in this game is clutter. And Amy is a part of that clutter. Seriously, she's not that important. At first, Amy helps Silver look for someone, while he helps her look for someone else. But after Sonic is revealed to be the character that both were looking for, Amy angrily tells Silver off and runs away. Now she has no reason to get involved in Silver's story anymore, and we never see her again. Actually, we do see her again. Amy later finds herself in Dr. Eggman's base and comes across Elise, who conveniently manages to escape her surprisingly unguarded prison cell. The two then escape from the base, and later they bond a little. This is a nice scene to see, and it always brings a smile to my face. There's just one little problem. It doesn't actually affect the plot at all! You could cut out the entire time period that Amy spent with Elise, and the plot wouldn't be affected in the slightest. At all. What makes this even more problematic is that after Amy and Elise spend time together, Amy, much like Sonic, leaves Elise in the castle alone. For some stupid reason. And unsurprisingly, Dr. Eggman captures Elise yet again, further proving that Elise was, once again, rescued for nothing. Moving on, let's talk about our third issue with Silver's plot, Blaze. Oh my god, they really screwed this character over. Blaze is supposed to be Silver's friend and mentor. Throughout the story, Blaze helps Silver in the fight against Iblis, and she sometimes gives him advice. At first, her role in the plot seems quite important, but when you take a closer look, you'll see that like several other characters in this game, she's not very relevant. For one thing, no one other than Silver acknowledges her existence. No one talks to her, makes gestures towards her, or even looks in her direction. For example, after watching Elise's death unfold in Kingdom Valley, Sonic talks to Silver only while Blaze just stands there on the sidelines. In Crisis City, while Memphis is explaining the origin of the Iblis trigger, he doesn't even look at Blaze, only at Silver. When Team Sonic enter the same room, right after Silver and the others leave, Knuckles comments on Memphis' similar appearance to Shadow's. That, and Sonic has already met Silver, and in the last story, Silver interacts with most of the other main characters. So Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are aware that Silver and Memphis exist, but we don't know whether or not they know that Blaze exists, since they don't even comment on her. Even though no one needed to talk to Blaze, it's just really weird to have her there in the story, yet have absolutely no one interact with her. What's also pretty dumb is that shortly before Silver tries to attack Sonic again in the Radical Train level, Blaze and Silver talk with Memphis. While Silver is fighting Sonic right after that, Blaze is nowhere to be found. Where did she go? She was with Silver right before that point in time, so why did she disappear? It's not as though she had something else to do. When Silver comes back from the past after witnessing the Solaris incident, Blaze is all like, "Oh hey Silver, what did you see?" This gives me the implication that Blaze wasn't actually doing anything important, and if she was, the story should have shown that, but it didn't. I just don't understand this part of the story. In one cutscene earlier in Silver's story, Blaze herself says that she doesn't feel comfortable leaving Silver alone because of how insecure he is. But here she is doing exactly that. And I'm not saying that Blaze has to be with Silver 24/7, but I'm not talking about just any moment where Silver's alone. Here he is trying to kill the Iblis trigger, which is an extremely important moment, and Blaze isn't going to go with him to make sure that he stays safe or that he completes his mission? Really? Why do characters keep disappearing in the plot like this? It happened with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and now Blaze. I'm starting to think that the writers couldn't think of any real reasons to make the characters disappear whenever they weren't needed, and decided to just axe them completely, hoping that the audience wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. No, that's not how writing works. You don't get to just make your characters vanish whenever you don't need them. Either give them a valid reason not to be present, or don't put them in the plot if having them around is that inconvenient for your story. It's as simple as that. I'm afraid it only gets worse from here. At the end of Silver's story, Silver tries to seal Iblis within himself, but Iblis rejects him. Blaze offers to do it, and succeeds. She asks Silver to send her to another dimension, but Silver doesn't want to do that to his own friend. Blaze then sends herself away, freeing Silver's world of Iblis. This was a very touching and heartbreaking moment, but there's one big problem. This sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. In the last story, Memphis finally decides to stop wasting his time with Silver and kills off Sonic himself. This causes Elise to cry and release Iblis, allowing Memphis to rejoin with Iblis to form Solaris. So in the end, it didn't really matter that Blaze sealed Iblis away. Memphis got what he wanted all along, making Blaze's sacrifice completely pointless. All in all, Blaze was not handled well in this game, which I find pretty disappointing. Here the writers were, going out of their way to alter Blaze's backstory from Sonic Rush to put her in this game, yet they didn't do anything with her in the end. I don't know why. The final issue with Silver's story is a condition that causes Elise to release Iblis, though this is an issue with the overall story, not just with Silver's story. During the Solaris incident, Silver tries to contain Iblis but struggles to do so. The Duke then enters the room with his unconscious daughter Elise in his arms. places her on a nearby table, and uses a Chaos Emerald to seal Iblis within her. Then, with his final breath, he gently tells the unconscious Elise not to cry because her tears will release Iblis within her. Elise does exactly that, not crying for the next 10 years. Okay, I don't care if it's fantasy or fiction. You cannot expect me to believe that someone can go 10 years without crying once. Only people who are psychologically incapable of feeling emotion, or at the very least incapable of feeling sadness, are capable of doing that. Elise does not have either of these traits. She is a normal girl with normal emotions just like everyone else. Also, she's not someone I would call emotionally tough either, considering how passive and sad she acts throughout the story. Thus, I have a very hard time believing how someone like her can go 10 years without crying once. I'd understand if Elise managed not to cry for a few months or even for a year, but 10 years is stretching it. Seriously, this is one of the most contrived plot points I have ever come across, and it sounds really dumb too. Again, this issue is not exclusive to Silver's story, but since it was introduced in Silver's story, I decided to bring it up here. As you can see, Silver's story is considerably better than Sonic's story as it took only 2.5 pages to discuss, compared to 4 pages for Sonic's story. But Silver's story is still quite flawed. Now let's talk about Shadow's story. Shadow's story is, without a doubt, the most competently written plot in the entire game. It has much, much fewer issues than the other two stories do. That being said, Shadow's story still has a few flaws. Number 1. Shadow's story lacks emotional depth. It just does, and there are several reasons for it. Reason number 1. Shadow does not have a personality in this game. Throughout the entire plot, Shadow acts completely businesslike and straightforward, which isn't necessarily bad, but with Shadow, that's all he is. In Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and even Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow felt more like a real person with an actual personality. In this game, he feels more like a robot. And it doesn't help that every time Rouge tries to have a conversation with him, he either blows her off or ignores her completely. Granted, Shadow has never been the nicest person around, but not to this extent. Shadow was perfectly capable of having normal conversations with his comrades in Sonic Heroes. I don't see why he couldn't do that in this game. Reason number 2. Shadow's story has a rehashed plot device. Throughout the entire story, Mephiles tries to convince Shadow to join him by telling Shadow that humanity is going to betray him one day. The problem with this is that we already went through this with the villain Black Doom and Shadow the Hedgehog. Black Doom tries to convince Shadow to join him by telling him that humanity betrayed him in the past. It's almost the exact same thing with Mephiles, except that Black Doom was much more convincing about it. As you would expect, Shadow refuses to listen to any of what Mephiles says, thus making the conflict established here dull and predictable. Now, towards the end of the story, Omega reveals to Shadow that humanity does indeed betray him in the future. Shadow's resolve actually seems to waver, but only for a bit. Then it's back to kicking Mephiles' butt again. Reason number 3. Other than defeating the villain, Shadow's story lacks any real conflict. The other two stories are different in this regard. Silver not only struggles with fighting an entity that's responsible for destroying his world, but he is also working with someone who's tricking him into killing someone innocent. That, and at the end of the plot, Silver loses his best friend. Sonic not only struggles with stopping Dr. Eggman from finishing his plan to revive the Flames of Disaster, but he also has to protect the princess from Dr. Eggman while at the same time teaching her how to enjoy life. Shadow really only has to take Mephiles down. That's it for his conflict. Yeah, he does have a best friend who betrays him in the future, but even then, that matter's resolved in a matter of minutes because Omega still chooses to stand by him in the end, and does exactly that in the second fight against Mephiles in Dusty Desert. Compared to the other two stories, especially Silver's story, Shadow's story doesn't pull on your heartstrings nearly as much. It's a pretty basic plot with the hero and the villain. That being said, Shadow's story is still surprisingly competently written. It doesn't have many of the writing issues that plague the other two stories. There are no stupid decisions from the characters, no plot contrivances, and no sudden character disappearances. It's a simple, logical, straightforward story from start to finish. There is one other issue with Shadow's story, but much like the issue about Elise's not crying for 10 years, it's more of an issue with the overall plot. After the Solaris incident, Shadow and Silver reunite outside of the castle. Shadow places the scepter of darkness against a tree, and Silver does the same with the young unconscious Elise. Then both hedgehogs prepare to return to the present. Shadow and Silver make a portal, and Shadow enters the portal first. Silver is about to follow, but he looks back at Princess Elise sitting against a nearby tree. Here lies the issue. Now, in Silver's story, Silver goes up to Princess Elise, gives her the blue Chaos Emerald, and goes through the portal. This part is fine. In Shadow's story, Silver turns back around and jumps straight into the portal with the blue Chaos Emerald still in his hand. This part is not fine. Now, I'm not sure how the writers could have made such a glaring mistake. I say this because at the very beginning of Sonic's story, the story that you play first, by the way, Elise is shown to have the blue Chaos Emerald in her possession, which she later gives to Sonic, who ends up giving it up to Dr. Eggman in order for him to release the captured Elise, only for Silver to find the Chaos Emerald in one of Dr. Eggman's guard robots later. All of this yields an inconsistency that should not have been present. The writers could have easily remedied this issue by making it so that when Silver looks back at young Elise sitting against a tree, and the camera zooms in on Elise, the screen fades to black in Shadow's story, but continues in Silver's story. They could have done exactly that. That is what they did at another point in the entire plot, after all. After Sonic and Shadow defeat Iblis in Silver's apocalyptic future, they both create a portal for returning to the present. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles then go through the portal. In Sonic's story, the camera then focuses on Rouge and Shadow and fades to black. In Shadow's story, the camera doesn't fade to black because there's a bit more after that point. Shadow sees Mephiles nearby and chases after him, while Rouge goes through the portal alone. Having the camera fade to black works just fine here in this scene. I don't see why they couldn't have done the same thing to the scene where Silver gives Elise the blue Chaos Emerald. Still, I must repeat that this issue is not exclusive to Shadow's story, since Silver's story suffers from this disconnect too. I think I've covered all the issues with Shadow's story, which, of course, were few in number. Now let's talk about the last story. There are two major problems with it. Let's talk about the first problem. As I said before, when the last story begins, Mephiles decides to stop wasting his time with Silver and plots to kill Sonic himself. Later, while Sonic and Elise are walking around in the Soliana forest, Mephiles appears behind them and blinds them with the strong light coming from a floating Chaos Emerald. While Sonic and Elise are distracted, Mephiles uses this opportunity to send a beam of light right through Sonic's body, killing him within seconds. Sonic falls to the ground and Elise becomes so horrified to the point of crying. Iblis then gets released, and Mephiles rejoins with him to become Solaris. Okay, I don't care if you kill the main protagonist, even if you're the first to do so. That does not automatically make you a good villain. And Mephiles is not a good villain. The story seems to want the audience to think, holy crap, Mephiles actually killed Sonic, something that most Sonic villains haven't been able to do. He's so badass and awesome. No, he is not. Fuck off with that. Mephiles kills Sonic in such a cowardly way. He shows up and just stabs Sonic in the back. Oh, the horror! Give me a break. Now, if we had been given a boss battle against Mephiles, only to fail anyway, then that would have worked and would have made the scene much more dramatic and powerful. But no. Instead, Mephiles just kills Sonic in an anticlimactic manner. And it doesn't help that Mephiles wastes his time doing things that aren't even beneficial to his plan. As I said earlier, Mephiles tries to trick Silver into killing Sonic when he can very easily kill Sonic himself. Plus, he tries to recruit Shadow into becoming his minion, which isn't a bad idea considering how powerful Shadow is, but it isn't something that Mephiles is required to do for his plan to take effect. So Mephiles didn't really need Shadow or Silver. In Shadow's defense, he was trying to stop Mephiles, so Mephiles had a reason to interact with him. Still, the only thing that matters to Mephiles is to make Elise cry, which is something that he should have done much earlier than he did. All Mephiles had to do was watch over Sonic and Elise until they bonded, killing Sonic afterwards. This was so simple to do, yet it took almost an entire game for Mephiles to accomplish. Thus, Mephiles is not a good villain. In fact, there are better villains for Sonic out there. Dr. Eggman, Metal Sonic, Chaos, and even Black Doom are good examples. Now, Mephiles did have the potential to be a great villain, considering how manipulative and calculating he was, but the writing screwed him over. It's quite sad. Seriously, I just find it laughable that the writers wanted you to think that Mephiles was a maniacal, diabolical, calculating genius, when in reality, he just came off as a completely impractical dumbass. Now, let's discuss the second problem with the last episode. After Memphiles becomes Solaris, the world gets consumed by Solaris's light. Suddenly, all the characters find themselves on a floating platform in some sort of void, wondering what happened. Now, let's ignore how convenient it is that out of all the living beings on the planet, all of these characters appeared in the exact same spot. It is a plot contrivance, but what's contrived isn't necessarily bad. So what's the issue then? It's this. Why are some of these characters even here? Tails, Knuckles, Dr. Eggman, and Amy have no reason to be here. Tails and Knuckles barely interact with Iblis and do not interact with Mephiles. They do try to help Sonic save Princess Elise, but that subplot does not directly involve Solaris, so they do not get a pass. Dr. Eggman does try to usurp the Flames of Disaster, but he doesn't interact with Iblis, Mephiles, or Solaris, so he does not get a pass either. Amy, she has the least amount of justification for being here. She came into town simply looking for Sonic, yet she got dragged into this mess anyway. Why? It seems to me that the writers needed Tails, Amy, and Knuckles only for helping to collect the Chaos Emeralds, and they needed Dr. Eggman to explain the Big Bad's plan to all of the characters and to the audience. The writers didn't need these characters because they were important in the plot, which they were not. Oh, and I love Dr. Eggman's line where he says, Mephiles played us all for fools. No, he didn't. The only two people that Mephiles tricked were Silver and Blaze. That's it. He didn't trick anyone else. There was no us in this story, Dr. Eggman. You barely mattered. And there's more. When you think about it, the only character that was needed in the story was Elise. That's it. None of the other characters were needed, except for Sonic. But even so, Sonic just happened to be the best way to make Elise cry. He had little importance beyond that. To be fair, Shadow, Silver, Rouge, and Omega were the only characters other than Elise who had any sort of actual impact on the plot, so they get a pass. However, the other characters do not get a pass. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, and Dr. Eggman were quite inconsequential. Wait, am I forgetting someone else who was insignificant? Hmm. Nope. You can see now that the last episode of this game's story had issues too, not just the first 3 episodes. Okay, I think I've covered just about all of the issues with this plot, and it took me only 11 and a half pages to do. God damn. Anyway, you already know that the plot of Sonic 2006 gets a lot of hate. Though the hate is overblown, it's not completely unwarranted. The plot is a mess. It's not the worst Sonic story out there, but it is a mess nonetheless. Meaningless characters and nonsensical plot devices do not make a good story. I know that I most likely ruffled a few feathers, but someone had to say it. This game's story is just not good. It's just bad. Sorry. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on the matter. Thanks for listening, everyone.